Hey guys, this is Black Woman 7 here, and today I'll be going over my list for the top 10 returning Pokemon for the Crown Tundra DLC. So, of course, this is going to be this list is going to be based off of the Galar Dex. So, or basically the list of Pokemon that are essentially in the in-game right now that haven't been, like, I guess you could say, dexited. So, but now that we have another group of Pokemon returning via the Crown Tundra DLC that's coming out in a few days. I think it was like 10 days at the time that I'm recording this video. But yeah, like this is gonna be an interesting group of Mons, since most of them are legendary Pokemon that are been consistently some of the best Pokemon in singles in general. So, and let's just get it right into it. So obviously the first thing I want to go over is the fact that this list is basically pure speculation, opinion, and theoremon. But of course, I'm gonna have I have my own reasonings and over here and say. So obviously, this isn't gonna be like based off of, let's say, VGC or doubles. This is purely singles, 6v6, and for Draft League in particular. So no obvious Ubers like Xerneas or Kyogre, the Pokemon we've seen from the trailers that they've kind of emphasized that will be a catch. But obviously Xerneas and Kyogre will be broken unless you're using them in like an Ubers draft that have certain restrictions. And I'm going to be going over how viable these 10 Pokemon are in terms of, like, you know, viability, value picks, the new moves they've gotten, and so on and so forth. The last option is basically like, I guess it goes with the second option on the top of the list. Reasonings. It's just all this information can change. Since earlier they did show the case that let's say I think a good example is like high horsepower Azumarill wasn't confirmed with the initial, like, you know, Isle of Armor DLC, as well as Ally Switch Politoed. But they ended up changing it last minute to where, like, they don't get those moves, and they'd be like pretty much game breaking for their respective. I wouldn't say game breaking, but huge buffs for their respective metagames. Like, obviously the Ally Switch is for like doubles, but like, so the point is, like, most of this information could change if you ask me. So that's something to take note of. So here are a few honorable mentions on this listing. We have Dragonite, Nidoking, Cortana, Finny, and Heatran. Now, starting from like left to right, no particular order, I do like the fact that Heatran is returning, and it now has access to his Flame Body ability. So you could, if you make contact with Heatran, it will pretty much you could like have a good chance to get burned or something like that. So that's pretty good if, like, assuming like they don't bring like an opponent doesn't bring, like, say, like a strong special fire type or something of that sort. So, or you could just spam Flame Body Tran just to hopefully get the burn on top of the other options it has with Scorching Sands, Lava Plume, Will-O-Wisp. So yeah, Heatran could just burn stuff now. Of course, it could always, like, you know, go for the typical taunt rocker stall breaker set with Magnum Storm Toxic. So yeah, Dragonite's kind of an interesting case because there's a lot of moves I've noticed that Dragonite got, like body press, Hydro Pump, still Wing Beat, which is pretty good since it doesn't have to rely on Fly anymore. But of course, this does mean that, like, and of course, with the biggest buff for Dragonite wasn't in particular any moves, but it's actually the item. They actually got access to heavy duty boots now, so that could make multi-scale. It won't be able to break with, like, upon like Rock's re-entry, so that's pretty massive in of itself. But in terms of like a value pick, I do view Dragonite as like sort of a niche dragon pick for a top tier, but it is definitely viable. Like, don't get me wrong, I think it's like, and the fact that, like, the other 10 Pokemon on the list are just pretty good if you ask me. So, and then you have Nidoking, which I guess you could put Nidoqueen as well on the list. non-honorable mentions, but they've been like very strong, like rockers um for like their respective like draft teams with like rocks, T-spikes, good grounded poison type if you ask me. So they have access to their sheer force boosted moves and the access to even taunt. So they could serve as wall break or stall breakers if they can. So the one thing that they did get, like Nidoking did get access to, is like Scorching Sands. Now, while it does receive like a sheer force boost, and you would probably go with Earth Power in that way, for something like Nidoqueen, like Scorching Sands could be pretty massive for poison point sets. So you could just potentially burn targets. So yeah. Another Pokemon I'll mention is Kartana. It didn't get anything interesting outside of Grassy Glide and Indoor, but Grassy Glide is kind of interesting in of itself, since it gives it priority in grassy terrain. So you need to draft like, let's say, another tier 1 mon like Tapu Bulu and Rillaboom, and very unlikely you're gonna be able to use that in like an actual Smogon singles where you could just whatever team you want. That would be amazing, but in a format where it restricts your Pokemon choices and whatnot, that's like Kartana isn't as useful. The moves it got wasn't as good, but it's still an interesting Pokemon if you ask me, because it's base 180 like attack is just with SD, beast boost is must. This thing's just gonna kill anything, since it literally causes paper cuts if you ask me. So last but not least, Tapu Fini. Like it actually has access to rest with the telepathy, since with the new hidden abilities you have access to its hidden ability telepathy. So you could actually toxic Gall burn stuff now that aren't flying, or let's say like Dragonite or such. But the thing is, it does lose out if you run telepathy. You do lose out in Misty Surge, so you can't you yourself can't get like status. So there's the catch. But then again, you're a Finny. You're literally a fairy type, so you can use your fairy typing to deal with dragons. So it's not necessarily like, but this is a huge like buff for like defensive Finny sets. It now has some good semi recovery. So anyways, let's just get on to the actual list. So number 10 we have is Zapdos. And Zapdos is kind of an interesting case, since like Dragonite, it's gonna appreciate the heavy duty boots, and with boots it doesn't have to take like 25% rocks entry, and that's something that's always slowed down Zapdos. And that's gonna be massive, since this thing also has access to moves like U-turn, Volt Switch, and of course Defog. So it's a great defogger to remove like entry hazards to begin with. So why not just have boots to take, and you won't get chipped down any further. So of course you're losing out on leftovers or even Rocky Helmet, but it's just another option for Zapdos to run, so that way it doesn't take rocks entry. So one thing I do like to point out is that this thing is annoying in general, with the paralysis support surprise between discharge with static, and that's just a nasty combination, especially if you're facing if you have a team or you're with physical contact mons, and Zapdos could just paralyze Pokemon if it wants to, and of course it could go with the traditional Thunder Wave. So and the one thing I would like to mention is that its new move Hurricane is essentially a godsend if you ask me. With base 125 special attack, Zapdos just becomes a massive threat from the special side. Yes, it loses out Hidden Power Ice, Hidden Power Grass, or something like Garchomp or Gastrodon, but Hurricane is just a good move in general. Granted, it has accuracy issues, but if you can hit, it's stab. This thing is stab boosted, by the way, and you'll be able to two-shots ground types that would normally take, let's say, a Hidden Power Ice for a 3-hit KO, and that's pretty, assuming you hit. And the secondary effect is even massive, or just as good, because you could just confuse an opponent, and if they get confused, 1 in 3 chance to get confused, they're essentially they just effectively wasted their turn and got chipped for you. So on top of the paralysis chance with discharge. This is like some pseudo like para flinch like pro like confusion stuff we haven't seen since like Dundurus, especially in the VGC scene. For those of you who played like VGC like 13, 12, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So, and of course, like very few Pokemon would like to switch into Hurricane plus Discharge on top of like the status ailments, like those moves on top of like the special attack stat is just amazing in general. Of course, like I will say that Zapdos, like it didn't get that much options other than other than like Hurricane. Yeah, you could kind of run like let's say a physical Zapdos set with Brave Bird and the dual wing beat, but the thing is, this thing is, and I know this thing has access to Curse via that the the one Zapdos you could get from like a transfer, but other than that, it doesn't have any much other options. Like Weather Ball is very good, and if you have like if you have a weather team with T-Tar, let's Pelipper, especially Rain, you can have access to like a base 100 like water type move, which is amazing. But again, like unless you draft Rain, then Zapdos, it's gonna be sticking to the same thing it's done from like the previous generations, and it faces a lot of heavy competition with other electric types like Raikou, Rotoms, like all 5 of them if you ask me. With boots, they've become viable now. Like so, it's gonna face a lot of like competition, especially since this is a tier 1 Pokemon we're talking about. In fact, all these Pokemon I'm talking about are potentially tier 1. So yeah. Number 9 on the list is an interesting case, and it is Garchomp. So on paper, it didn't get anything new. So like, let's say like Breaking Swipes, Scale Shots, and Scorching Sand. But it's Garchomp for Christ's sake. This thing has a high attack stat with 130 and a good like trollish speed of 102. So this thing is a great Swords Dancer and can just like potentially wall break or just sweep an opponent if it wants to. So, and now you have access to scale shots, which effectively give this thing like a +1 speed, as well as like +2 on your attack. That could be massive on SD sets. Of course, you're going to be lowering your defense stat, or what have you say, and it can make you being much more susceptible to like priority options. But the trade-off could be worth it as well. So another interesting move it got is Scorching Sand. So Garchomp has always been like a very good defensive tank if you want to bring like, let's say, like Rocky Element and Rough Skin. But with Scorching Sand, it has the possibility to burn stuff, similar to how water types go for Scald. And its base 80 special attack isn't the best, but you could just go for like burns if you want to, for the sake of it. So it's just another good like support option you could do. So of course Garchomp appreciates the removal of Hidden Power Eyes. Like that's like the one, like I said with Zapdos, like that's like the one other mon that it would like want to hit with Hidden Power Eyes. And as well as like with the move removed now, like Garchomp's pretty much free to like run SD or even like the tank sets again. Now of course this does mean like it has to face its traditional counters, the bulky like flying type Pokemon that we'll see in the next 2 slides, or the next 2 like Mons, and the of course like the waters, the ice types, the fairies, and of course fast dragons and fast threats that could just revenge kill it. So granted, like I do think Scale Shot Garchomp might see some use, just because the speed raise is just invaluable if you ask me. So number 8 on the list is an interesting Pokemon that we've seen in the play before, and that is a Celesteela. And of course, Steel Flying like on Celesteela is just amazing. We've seen it used on a Corviknight and on Skarmory, and they're traditionally been tier 1. And I see Celesteela being like no different. It's just a fantastic defensive typing and strong overall bulk. Like literally in theory, like it's like basically 100, like 100, 100, 100 HP, defense, and the death, even though it's different. You see there, but of course, like the best set for Celesteela and the most annoying one is probably Subseed Toxic, because all the Celesteela has to do is just chip down the opponent, just enough so that like either like it's allied Pokemon or partner Pokemon, or Celesteela itself can just like win the game, just chipping down your opponent and then getting gradual beast boost from either attack, defense, special attack, to death, even speed if it literally runs that much. So I don't know, like I have to check on that. So, and another option it got was Cosmic Power. So it's another viable win con since you're increasing its already bulky defense stats into like you don't have to rely on the beast boosts themselves, like itself, just Okoing a Pokemon to like get a Spadef raise. You could just go for Cosmic Power and get a defense raise as well. So on top of that, this thing is a very monstrous defensive threat if you ask me. It also has access to Body Slam, so it could go for paralysis support, or just paraflinch, or not paraflinch, but like yeah, you could even paraflinch stuff if you run Iron Head as well. So that's kind of hilarious if you ask me. So Body Slam, Iron Head, Belly. That's kind of funny. Even though I do think like Heavy Slam is the better option. So yeah, the only thing I will say is about Selly is that it is very passive, and it does while it does appreciate like the removal of Z moves and Dynamax. I think this is like the one Pokemon that you may not want to have it against a Gmax Mon, since those Gmax Mons have access to their Dynamax options, and they could just overpower or just set up on Selly. So then again, Celesteela could just protect if it wants to. So yeah. So number 9 or number 7 on the list is Landorus-T. It's a familiar Pokemon we've all seen and grown about, but I mean, this is Landorus-T for crying out loud. So with the ground flying typing, like Landorus is gonna appreciate the removal of Hidden Power Ice. It loves it. Like, I mean, with good defense typing, Intimidate, and you have a high attack stat, so this is like a prime, like pivot, U-turner, rocker, defogger, or you could just give it a choice scarf or band even. So like, of course, one of like Standard's best sets has been like Swords Dance plus Rocks. That's like a set similar to Garchomp, but the only difference is you can intimidate the target, and you have your high attack stat, so you could just, and on top of like that, you could potentially U-turn or go for Explosion, so to get like a kill or just get momentum immediately. So, and of course, it's like there's so many ways you could run Landorus now, and now that like let's say Hidden Power Ice is gone, like that's like one option that Landorus doesn't have to worry about as often. So of course, it does have to worry about it's the only thing I would say about Landorus is that it's relatively slow now, unless you give it a choice scarf or like a rock polish set. But as you see on this list, most of the Pokemon are faster than Landorus, have some way to circumvent its like speed, or just naturally faster. They have some very good defensive utility against, or it to the point where it has to run something like Rock Slide or Knock Off as a coverage option. So there are plenty of checks for Landorus-T, but then again, like the thing is, like it's one of those Pokemon that you have to respect, since it has access to Sword Stance. It could always just, if you give this thing like a +2 SD on top of a potential Earthquake boosted Earthquake with +2, it's just might be like difficult to handle or take. So number 6 on the list is interesting Pokemon, and I think like a lot of people have talked about it, and that is Latios. I could put Latios on the list, but I feel like Latios is better in retrospect. So like the new moves like Latios has is just beyond amazing. Between like Mystical Fire, Baton Pass, Agility, Future Sight, and Aura Sphere. Like Mystical Fire and the Aura Sphere alone are typically like fire and fighting coverage that Latios would have to pick and choose between, like, you know, from a hidden power, you know, type. But now the hidden power is gone, you now have access to two moves that like serve as that role. Like, and again, Mystical Fire has a good effect that you could just lower the opponent's special attack, and Latios has a great like, you know, Spadef stat as is. So on top of like potentially going for a Calm Mind, you could just like beat special attackers down pretty much, or set up on them, and then you have Aura Sphere, which allows you to just beat Pokemon like Bisharp, T-Tar. They can't Pursuit Trap you since Pursuit is gone. So, and on top of that, Pursuit is gone. Like, this is like pretty much a godsend. That's like the one move that's pretty much effectively stopped Latios from dominating formats. And now that you have access to, and basically it could just run like, to say like Life Orb Dracometer or Specs even, and just like, you know, drop them Dracos. So, and on top of that, it already has a good move pool coverage with Ice Beam, Thunderbolt, Energy Ball, Grass Knot, Shadow Ball, Surf, and even has some good support options like, you know, dual screens. Again, Baton Pass is a huge one since it gives it momentum, something that Latios has never had before, other than like Memento, but it would have to, you know, sacrifice itself. So, it's still a good option. Don't get me wrong, on a specific like build, but with Baton Pass, it's like I cannot stress how huge that is for, like, you know, say a like choice Latios or like an offensive Latios. You could just Baton Pass on a possible switch out, and they just like get in your like you get good positioning from that. So the only thing I'll say from Latios is it's very frail on the physical side, so it could get picked off from like physical priority moves. And it is weak to a bunch of typings like Dark, Bug, like Dark Bug, Ice. And it's Dragon, Psychic. Like, it, since it's Dragon and Psychic, it is like there are certain Steel types that could beat it, but though it can like take advantage of either Mystical Fire or Aura Sphere. So keep that as you may. So, and again, like 110 speed, while it's fast, it's not as fast as like stuff like Zeraora, Dragapult, like Tornadus, even Thundurus was returning. So yeah, I would say like Latios is a great Pokemon as like a hit and run mon, like, you know, just drop Dracos and like, you know, maybe just go for like a CM here and there. So, but at the same time, I think it's still good enough to like make it on this list. I mean, it's literally number 6 on the list. So next Pokemon I'll talk about is Pokemon that's also another Dragon and Ground type Pokemon, and that is Zygarde 50% form. Now this Pokemon got a lot of new moves between like, let's say like the new ones I would say worth mentioning are like Breaking Swipe, Body Slam, and Scale Shot. So this is sort of similar to like Garchomp, though it also has a bunch of other ones that I don't know whether or not they'll be used, since Thousand Arrows is the de facto ground type move that you're using on Zygarde 100% of the time. So likewise, like Zygarde has like 108, 121, and 95 like bulk, like overall bulk, and its typing is just good in general. And Thousand Arrows, again, it's a good like chipping move, since it like nothing is immune to that move itself. So, and the best part about Zygarde, since he has a good amount of bulk to utilize Dragon Dance, Coil, Weakness Policy if you run that item, and now you have access to Scale Shot. So this allows Zygarde to essentially over like to pretty much like it gives it like so many setup options on top of all like the ones it has. Like it gave it like +1 speed and like -1 defense, and Zygarde is pretty bulky from the defensive side, so it doesn't like worry that much about it. And on top of that, you could just run Coil, so you could just at least regain the defense stat again. So on top of that, it has good priority in the speed control options with Glare, E-Speed for like, you know, priority, and Body Slam to paralyze stuff on the switch in. So, and one thing I noted from Zygarde's like, you know, buff move pool is that it now has access to, which is surprising, but like it has access to like single target or not single target, but single, you know, hit like dragon moves like, you know, Breaking Swipe and Scale Shot. It doesn't have to rely on Outrage anymore. Now, of course, Outrage, you will see that on like Choice Band sets or whatever, you know, depending on the situation. But something like Scale Shot could be better, or like our Breaking Swipes could be better on like Coil sets or defensive Zygarde builds. And the best part is, it actually appreciates the removal of Hidden Power Ice, since that's like the one move people would often tech for Zygarde. But of course, the only thing that Zygarde, like the main problem with Zygarde is that base 100 attack isn't like as strong as it used to be. So, like literally, like you're gonna have to like attempt to set up with Zygarde, or use something like Choice Band or Life Orb, like to like circumvent its like mediocre attacks like move pool. So, but even then, like Zygarde is just one of those Pokemon. It's bulky enough to set up when it wants to set up with, you know, sub coil, like I can say sub coil, like Scale Shot, like 1,000 arrows for, and that could be very like deadly if you ask me. Being like very good, so yeah, that's Zygarde. Yeah, and let's get on to like the top 4 on this list. So number 4 is a Pokemon that I have. You'll be surprised why I've ranked it high, and that is Tapu Bulu. And man, if you look at the moves it got, it is like almost a godsend that they gave Bulu almost all these moves between Grassy Glide, Bullet Seeds, Close Combat, Play Rough, High Horsepower, Darkest Lariat, and of course the cherry on top of this. Like, what's funny is like you know, in previously with like with around like I guess it was like February with the initial like Datamine, like it actually it gained all these moves initially, and I guess the exception would be like the top 3: Grassy Glide, Misty Explosion, Terrain Pulse. But the other the bottom options there, like, you know, one highlighted in red, were just as good, if not better, like, you know, coverage options for Bulu to use. But then Game Freak invented Grassy Glide. And honestly, that's massive for Pokemon like Tapu Bulu, because now you have Grassy Surge, which Grassy Glide that's basically why you're going to use that move. Since you're going to have a stab, brain boosted Grassy Glide. And on top of that, that's priority with 130 attack. And that's just incredible, because Bulu's a very bulky Pokemon as is, and its offensive stats are just as strong. So this kind of gives me a bit of Scizor vibes, if you ask me, even though the typing itself is a little bit suspect, you know, weak to poison, ice, steel, I was gonna say like fire, flying, but it has ways around it now, those typings. It has access to high horsepower already. Poison, fire, steel types can't switch into this thing with that. And of course, it's a ground move that isn't weakened by grassy terrain. It has close combat for steel types. It has play rough for dragon types that would previously wall Bulu for like all of Gen 7. Of course, Bulu can run toxic, leech seed, and even if you have a really bad matchup, Dazzling Gleam, but now you have access to play rough, which is pretty massive buff. And honestly, this is just one of the honestly this might be the most improved Pokemon we see. And I wouldn't be surprised that this thing just goes like often like in the top 5 picks. So one thing I will say about like Tapu Bulu is it's basically one of like it has the move pool, it has the coverage options, and it could just run like both offensive and defensive sets pretty well as is. Like because previously we've seen this thing run like Subseed, Toxic, like Horn Leech, but now it has access to like Grassy Glide, so we might see something like Nature's Madness, like, and then you could go for Nature's Madness, then Grassy Glide your opponent down. So that's pretty like scary. On top of that, this thing has access to Swords Dance, and I haven't even talked about Grassy Glide plus Life Orb plus SD Grassy Terrain boosted Bulu. That thing's just scary as hell. That thing will murder Pokemon. Like to give you a good calculation, +2 Life Orb boosted Bulu Oko's Garchomp. Yeah, with like Grassy Glide. And it Oko's something like Neolego, a Pokemon that would traditionally counter Bulu. It just you could just out prioritize, outspeed it, and just kill a Neolego, especially with Rock's Chip. So Bulu is just incredible if you ask me. It's just one of the best new Pokemon or old new Pokemon coming back. So again, like the I guess the only thing I have is that this thing isn't like like this thing is weak to a plethora of typings, and it might have 4 moves syndrome, but it might be worth it if you ask me, because this is like draft league we're talking about. So and with the restricted decks like Galar Dex, this thing will be able to have the luxury of running like a certain like coverage move or set that could like they could appreciate. So I think Bulu might just have like one of the best like improvements in all of like draft league or in singles in general. I think we might see this thing be like one of the best Pokemon. So I only gave it number 4 because the other 3 Pokemon are even scarier on this list, and just because they got like a few options and buffs here and there that are just they're already good Pokemon as is, but they're just gonna push them over the top. Alright, so number 3 on the list is Tapu Lele. And Tapu Lele is an interesting Pokemon since this thing only got a couple interesting buffs, but the one move it got buffed in the most was, well, again, one of the terrain moves that was introduced in the Isle of Armor in Expanding Force. Now, what Expanding Force does is that it gives the Psychic Terrain user using, or not Psychic Terrain user, or anyone using the move a 1.5 boost if it's in their Psychic Terrain. So you have the Psychic Terrain boost, which is like 1.3, the Expanding Force boost, which is 1.5, and Stab. And you see where I'm going with this. This thing is just gonna be hits really hard, if you ask me. So like this thing is just incredibly difficult to switch into, and it's honestly one of the few Pokemon that I'd strongly like consider like nerfing in terms of like removing, let's say, Expanding Force from its move pool, since that's just gonna allow Lele just to function, just to just two-shot everything on opposing teams. I think even like without like Expanding Force, Lele is just gonna be just as powerful, and it's just gonna be able to two-shot anything with Psychic or like Moonblast. But if you allow this thing with Expanding Force, it's just gonna two-shot almost everything in the game. That's not Steel or Dark type, but then Dark types are just gonna get murdered by Moonblast. So the only thing that this thing like doesn't appreciate, or with Tapu Lele, is effectively it doesn't have a way like to hit Steel types other than Focus Blast. So you have to rely on something like an accurate Focus Blast instead of something like hidden power fire traditionally to um deal with opposing steals. Like let's say Kartana. So with something like Celesteela, Corviknight, you could just run Thunderbolt. So yeah. Again, expanding force is just incredibly powerful on a Lele. But I think I could see that thing just I could see that move being like people are just like, axing it from like individual drafts because and just making it like sort of manageable for Lele as is, so we'll see. Alright, so number 2 on the list is Tornadus-T. And Tornadus-T is kind of an interesting case because it's one of those Pokemon that didn't gain much from the initial like move pools, like new move tutors and whatnot. But it did get access to two things that it didn't have in previous generations. One, it got access to boots, which is pretty massive as is, since it could like switch out in and out between like like it's with between like rocks and so on. So it could actually regain like HP back for using boots. So that's pretty massive. And now it has access to Nasty Plot. And this just makes Tornadus just a scary offensive threat because it already has a 121 speed. And with Nasty Plot, this allows it to serve as a good cleaner or just sweeper in general because like Stab Hurricane, Heat Wave, Focus Blast, like Psychic, Icy Wind, Sludge Wave, Sludge Bomb, you name it, like Dark Pulse, like this thing is gonna be able to like to overpower several almost any team if it wants to. So it's one of the few Pokemon that I do think that might just get like either banned or they might have to remove like Nasty Plot if you're for like certain leagues. But even then, I do see like Tornadus-T like just being like the usual pivot option, being able to like remove like hazards or defog, taunt, knock off, pivot. But even still, like it doesn't like, despite like its role being like about the same, it's just an incredible Pokemon since you could just switch in and out like without the fear of like heavy duty or rocks with your heavy duty boots. So you do have to watch out for like faster threats like Zeraora or Dragapult, but again, those Pokemon don't want to switch into Torn, especially if they get knocked off, Toxic, or just get chipped by Hurricane. So yeah, that's pretty much my number 2 option here. And the last but not least, and I think we all know what this one is Tapu Koko. And Tapu Koko is kind of an interesting case since with some of the new moves it got between Play Rough, Close Combat, and now Rising Voltage, this allows Koko to be like first of all, it already has a very usable physical coverage moves like Brave Bird, U-Turn, Wild Charge. But but it's often been limited. But now you have access to Stab Play Rough to use, with your 115 attack stat. That's pretty massive for Koko if it wants to hit something like Garchomp or like Latios on. So on top of that, you have Close Combat, so you could CC, let's say a Stack Attacka or like a Kartana. So that's pretty massive for Koko. So it's with a high, and of course you could always U-turn or Volt Switch out to avoid the drops, defense drops, and reset. And on top of all this, it gets access to Rising Voltage. And this move is pretty dangerous because I was doing some calcs and effectively I think Choice Specs Koko just pretty much with Rising Voltage under Electric Terrain just OHKOs every frail Pokemon in the game. That's not that's like a non-resist or immune. Or it's either that or a 2-shot, which is still pretty impressive. Now, of course, there are certain things about Rising Voltage that are like the upside. Obviously, there's a massive upside with using Rising Voltage since it's all the multipliers you see on top of like all the on top of like Koko being an already fast Pokemon, being able to very likely outspeed and kill everything or two-shot everything. That's pretty massive. Again, like you have to be very careful about using Koko versus like ground types, and since it did lose access to Hidden Power or Ice, so it does have access to Grass Knot at least to its some Pokemon, so it isn't entirely a total loss for Koko. Like basically speaking, like it's gonna have like a reinvigorated like move pool move set with the Play Rough, Close Combat, Rising Voltage. Like even if like let's say Rising Voltage is like, let's say if there's a complex ban on that for like some leagues, it's still a very good Pokemon to utilize since like again Close Combat, Play Rough alone, just on top of let's say Thunderbolt, even like Terrain Pulse. Like something I will mention is that Terrain Pulse is actually like a few like points like less stronger, or like it's almost as strong as like or like the original like Tapu Koko from Gen 7, since with the terrain nerf, like it's now like 1.3 instead of 1.5. So, and with Terrain Pulse, it becomes like an electric, a base 100 electric move. So that's something to use if to consider if say like Rising Voltage isn't Koko isn't allowed, or if there's a complex ban on it. So, and again, like Koko has a good support coverage with like Nature's Madness, Taunt, Defog, though it has to be careful about running Defog for like special sets. I think physical will be fine since it doesn't like it won't at least like be able to pivot out. But like special sets that rely on deep like on like let's say like the terrain boost, it'll like Rising Voltage or Terrain Pulse, they'll remove the terrain, so careful with that. You have access to screens, taunt, U-turn, volt switch, etc, etc. So this is a great pivot option. It has roost, so it could be a decent like wall or pivot, similar to like something like Zapdos. It's not as defensive as Zapdos, so just bear that in mind. So, but still, this thing could just fulfill like any like offensive or like support or even defensive sets, if for any like, or even like fulfill any role if it wants to, almost for a team. So I wouldn't be surprised if this thing is still like picked as the #1 Pokemon, like or for an individual draft. So again, like the terrain nerf with default or the 1.5 to 1.3 and the whole hidden power ice is a little bit rough on Koko, but I think it makes up for it with the new moves it got. So we'll just have to wait and see how this guy like does in the individual drafts. So yeah. One last thing I'll go over is like honorable mentions, since honestly these Pokemon in a draft league setting would probably be pretty much like busted if you ask me. Naganadel, Base Boost, plus Spikes, plus T-Spikes, and Nasty Fly, yeah. I don't know about that, dude. Genesect, let's not talk about Genesect. And then you have Sheer Force Landorus. I mean Landorus has always been like one of those Pokemon that's just been like, every time they allow it in singles, it's just like broken. It's like in that regard. And then if you ask me in draft, it's just always, if you allow like or if like people allow like certain like Sheer Force Landorus and their like things and whatnot, like it'll just like be one of the better Pokemon under drafts, depending on like how they use it. So, and then you have like Speed Boost Blaziken. Of course, like Blaziken is often used as a substitution instead of like speed, like as a complex band for Speed Boost. But it did gain access to U-turn and close combat, so that's pretty good for a lower tier fire type. And last but not least, we have Pheromosa, which is basically Deoxys, so do I have to go over that? So yeah, this is my list of 10 Pokemon that are like just like Pokemon that you gotta watch out for like upcoming like Galar Dex drafts with Crown Tundra like DLC Mons. So I'm not so sure if most of these guys will be. I do feel like with Koko, Torn, and Lele, I think they'll have complex bans. Well, where with their respective new moves will be like won't be allowed and such, or they just might be like they might just be like like banned in general. So we'll just have to wait and see, and that's entirely dependent on like certain leagues will address them. So address those issues. So yeah, that's my list and of like Pokemon that I'd say you gotta watch out for, since they're pretty much the best new Mons coming back. So anyways, that's all I have to say now, and yeah, I'll see you guys soon.